actually train people to work in validation specifically through a 3-month program which we deliver in Dublin, in Sandyford. This is a bit about the company background. I won't walk you through this step by step because I would be here for 15 minutes doing so, but just to let you know, our company, I suppose, has 3 streams and they're complementary. Mary Jo was here earlier from the education division, but we also actually design, manufacture and develop process analytical technology, and that sits on top of the manufacturing process for pharmaceutical companies, particularly things like fluid bed granulation. It looks at particle recognition and sizing and helps people control their pharmaceutical manufacturing processes. The last division of the company to be set up in 2016 was this. This is our technical services division. And what we do is we have a number of ex-Pfizer technical services managers who spend 3 months, maybe up to 4 months, purpose training small groups of people to work in validation specifically. It's called problem-based learning. So what we do is we have as work, I suppose, real world as we can, a number of change scenarios. We have a small lab where we have sets of equipment that will be commonly used within oral solid dose manufacturing, and we use that set of equipment to help to facilitate people to learn in a safe environment. So what people will be doing is working in a multidisciplinary group as you would in validation in industry, and writing and executing protocols. So, a bit about validation. The simplest way I can put it is it's a set of activities to provide documented evidence that we control our manufacturing and make a product, a safe product, and do so reliably. So, yes, there's an emphasis definitely on documentation, and for that reason, we look for good technical writers. And the first step we have in selecting people to come onto this program, because as I said, the numbers are quite small, just maybe 6 to 10 people per quarter, is we ask you to do a technical writing assessment for us. It's the kind of documentation that you're going to come across in a manufacturing sector within a GMP environment, are things like standard operating procedures, BMRs, or your batch manufacturing records. The documentation is providing the evidence to a regulator that you're doing what you say you're going to do and you're manufacturing your process safely. And it sounds straightforward, but believe me, it isn't. When you look at nowadays the type of products that we're manufacturing, even the cleaning of the equipment afterwards and the validation of that cleaning can take longer than the manufacturing cycle itself. So it's quite a complex area, but the documentation definitely gives the regulators the peace of mind that what we're doing is consistent, and the regulators want to see that if we have problems, that we're addressing those problems. We're capturing them in what's called a CAPA, so we have corrective action and preventive action, and documentation to prove that. So believe it or not, an auditor doesn't want to come and see a company that has no CAPAs, which the company has made no mistakes, because they'll feel, how well do you know your process? It's sometimes in solving problems and in correcting mistakes and preventing them that we get to know our process very, very well. So why do we validate? Well, number one, it's a regulatory requirement, so it needs to be done. We have to look at qualifying the installation of equipment. We need to look at, we've qualified the operations of it, and we need to show that that equipment is performing as it should be, and we generate test cases to do so. So we can't just say, yes, this piece of equipment is clean. We need to have a validation master plan for cleaning that shows exactly how we're cleaning it and that proves that it is clean afterwards. We can't just clean it until we feel, okay, it's clean enough. We must do it in a very consistent way based on the procedures and the calculations that we have worked out. So we also want to protect our employees, because nowadays you're producing increasingly potent drugs, and a lot of that needs to happen in a high containment situation as well. But above all else, we want to make sure that we protect our patients by managing risk effectively. And that, from a validation point of view, has to happen particularly before, during, and after any changes. And I suppose this is the point of why you'll see a lot of validation jobs being advertised at the moment, and why validation as a career is a very relevant one. It's because of the degree of change going on in the sector right now. So we have traditionally the pharmaceutical sector producing a lot of tablets, etc. But those particular patents that they were maybe producing the same drug for the last 20 to 40 years are beginning to come off what we call a patent cliff. So the companies are doing a number of things. They're developing new drugs based on completely different technologies that are new to them potentially, including the biologics field, and they're also introducing new products into sites that maybe were single product manufacturing sites for a long time. So any of the change that occurs in terms of equipment or process, etc., we need as validation engineers to account for that change, and we need to manage and accept it in a very controlled way. So you'll see a lot of jobs advertised for validation engineers for that reason, is because there's a lot to do in a fast-moving and growing sector, where even the technology itself is, changing quite quickly. It's also a career, I suppose, that demands a lot of rigor. As I said earlier on, if you're talking about your cleaning validation for example, you need to calculate what's the allowable amount of product that you can carry over from one batch into the next batch. Those calculations, are not ones that you are coming up with yourself based on your own rationale, but those that are recommended to you by, for instance, the FDA. So you need to look at your allowable daily exposure of those drugs and make sure you stay within your calculations, that you work out the exact limitations of your equipment. You set upper and lower limits on how the equipment needs to work, and you prove that you're staying within those acceptable ranges. So your measuring needs to be good, your calculations need to be good, you need to have good stability testing, and you need to be, take the time to really look at the detail of what you're doing very well. So for those of you that enjoy that and like, doing a job where there's huge attention to detail required, and a lot of time to get that detail right, the pharmaceutical and medtech sectors will put that time in. It's also a responsible job, because you're often signing off on the protocols that then become the how-tos for everybody else in the company. If you're designing standard operating procedures, you need to write them so that they're understandable by the audience involved. And it's not enough for the regulators to see mistakes that you're saying, oh, that's down to human error. Your job as a validation engineer is to make sure there isn't room for human error. So in that way, you protect your employees as well. I think one of the other aspects of validation that's interesting is just the range involved. Increasingly, what we're finding is there's a lot of specialist skills being encouraged from the point of view of third level education. We're getting categories and subcategories, and we're getting scientists who can have a whole career based on a single cell structure. But in validation, it's a multidisciplinary approach. You have different functions that need to work well together, and it's the validation engineer that interfaces between operations, engineering, production, QA, etc., to make sure that you're looking at your product from a life cycle point of view and you're getting the detail right. So there's good variety for people within it. There's everything from, yes, sitting at your desk and typing up protocols, but you also could be putting an oxygen tank on your back to climb into a bioreactor that's 2 stories high. So it can be very hands-on at times, and it can have a lot of technical writing involved at other times. But it's that range that might interest some people. So do you think you might be suitable for validation? First of all, I have to say you need a level 8 qualification in a technical subject, but definitely one of the, we would say, competencies that we like to see is somebody with a natural curiosity. So if you're an engineer, which you've always been very science curious, or if you're a scientist and you've always been very engineering curious, and you're the type of person who always tends to ask why, this could be an area for you, because the more we question our own assumptions, look for new ideas to bring them into bear to solve complex problems, and look to work cross-contextually, the more we can do well within validation. You need strong reasoning skills, both quantitative and qualitative. I'll talk about that in a second. You certainly need to be an effective communicator, because you are really, your audience is a cross-functional audience. You need to justify your rationale for doing things. You need to work across a number of departments to come up with something that's going to work, and then go to QA and have them review and approve it for you before you can sign anything or they'll sign off on anything. So again, it's, being able to know your audience and being able to rationally argue your point. Because ultimately, a regulator could be coming and interviewing you as to why you did something in a certain way. So you need to really understand your rationale well and be able to explain it. So a sensibility fit from our point of view, really we look at cognitive skills, we look at your social skills, that you can mix well with other departments, and explain something complicated maybe in a simple way to other people, and get people on board for an idea that you have. But we also want people of good integrity, because ultimately, it's a responsible job where you're signing on the bottom line something like, for instance, releasing a batch, which might have been a validation batch. You want to see, can that be commercialised? It's your signature that could make the difference there to decide that yes or no. So you need to be someone who probably has a certain approach in the first place, knows what you know, knows what you don't know, and has a lot of intellectual integrity that will go and seek inputs from other people. So from a quantitative reasoning point of view, if you understand the methods you've used, maybe in a lab before, you're interested in them, Not just that you're pressing a button on a machine to carry out tests for you, but you're really interested in what's the rationale behind those tests. If you're very particular in how you measure, and you're careful and you enjoy that rigor and that discipline, if you're comfortable with calculations, particularly if you're in the chemistry field, the cleaning validation award gives a lot of opportunities for you there, because you need to understand both a product that could be a chemically based product, but also the detergents that you're using are chemistry based. You need to be somebody who looks at calibration reports and can maybe look what's going on with a particular piece of equipment and read between the lines of those reports and understands how to calibrate even something simple like a scale as well. And yes, there's a lot of data and statistics, and there are a lot of statisticians working with validation leaders because we have more data, because as I said, we have more statistical process control of the processes themselves going on. But we also need somebody who can look behind the data, interpret it and tell the story of what's happening, because ultimately the decision is whether or not your system is in with control, and the data isn't going to tell you everything, and using the same tools all the time won't tell you something either. Sometimes you need to even decide, well, what's the data we actually need in the first place. So your qualitative reasoning comes in handy from the point of view of interpreting even the guidelines. They are not all that prescriptive, okay? We have ISO 13485 within MedTech, and we have your ICHs, Q1, Q8, Q9, Q10, 11, all of those guidelines. You know, at the end of the day, will sometimes come into conflict with one another, so somebody needs to make a call on that, and that typically will be a validation engineer. You also need to take points on analytical details from other departments and synthesize those to make sense of the overall picture. And you need to make judgments at times. Okay, within the context of our quality systems, what's the right thing to do? And build a rationale that the regulator will understand and be convinced by. So there's a lot of evaluation judgment. And what I have in the corner there is a risk matrix. So ultimately, you'll be sitting with a number of domain specialists, and you know, you can't reach a decision on risk by just averaging it out. You need to be able to weigh up the different inputs from different people to decide what the level of risk is. Okay? So we combine both, I suppose, within validation, both your quantitative and your qualitative skills, and what we're mainly trying to do is be purpose-driven. What's critical about your parameters that you need to control? Where are the cause-effect relationships? How do we figure those out? Do we need to do root cause analysis? That's part of the job. How do we protect what's critical from the point of view of the quality attributes of the product that we're actually producing? We have a big emphasis on continuous professional development, so those that we hire permanently when they complete their 6-month probation have access to our master's programs for free through the Innopharma Education Division, and we very much coach people and mentor them through their I suppose, career long term. Typically people are going out to assignments for a year or two, sometimes even 3 years with the first client, but we look to very much direct people's careers that they learn as much as they can. So if anybody is interested in validation and wants to come and talk to me, please do come downstairs at the Innopharma stand. I'll probably run over my time, but if you have questions, come and ask them. Thanks guys.